The Colours That Blind, Chapter 55, Ambuya's Story. The morning after Teacher Edwards' babies were born, I stood by the missus's stove, exhausted. I'd not gotten a wink of sleep thinking of what Tawana had said to Matthew, and of the bad news the young boy had brought for the missionaries. As I reached out to turn the pan of chicken on the missus's stove, the loud chugging sound of the Bass's engine choked as the car drove in. I hovered by the kitchen doorway, listening for footsteps and eyeing the sizzling pan to make sure the food didn't burn. For a moment, only the wind whistled through the front door. Then finally, the Bass's voice punched the silence. I could hear the traces of alcohol in it as he ordered someone to leave him alone. I peered out just in time to see him topple on the veranda stairs and cuss while he sat there stranded. After briefly hesitating, I skittered towards him to see if I could help. The missus stood a little way behind him, seemingly annoyed. "Bass, are you all right?" "Oh, he's all right. Too drunk to walk, that's all that's wrong with him. Been drinking the whole damn bottle." He looked up at her and scowled. "I bloody bruised my knee here." He paused, burped, then continued, "because this wife of mine kept telling me, always nagging. Nag, nag, nag," he said, now trying to focus on his wagging finger. The missus breathed out an exasperated sigh. "Well, don't just stand there, girlie. Didn't they say you were a nurse? Well, fix my knee then, won't you?" I knelt beside him and looked up to the missus, who only rolled her eyes and walked past me. I hesitated for a while before eventually untying the duku from my head and tying it tightly around the Bass's knee. Feeling the wind push against my hair, I quickly tried to smooth back my voluminous hair, nervously peering to see if the missus had seen me. The Bass pushed me aside and struggled to get up. "Bloody useless, all the women here, fussing over hair all the time," he said, staggering into the house. By the time I came back to the veranda with the table mats, the missus and Bass Rogers were already sitting outside. The missus sat on the right like she always did, a magazine on her lap and her knitting needles clicking against each other as she pulled the wool over them. She paused for a second, watching me dish out the food before snipping a piece of the wool off with the shiny pair of silver shears that had been by her foot. To her clear displeasure, the Bass was humming loudly, swaying and laughing to himself in the chair. Her eyes rose to my head and my heart skipped. I quickly looked around to see whether the Bass had tossed my duku somewhere close, but I could not find it, and she did not say anything. As my eyes wandered, they picked up the sight of Matthew and Philip walking towards the veranda from the tea plantation, in shirts bleached by the sun and with their hair playing loosely to the tune of the wind. At the sight of him, I could only stand and stare, remembering what Tawana had said. "Aunt April," Philip leaned in to kiss her cheek. I watched him from the other side of the table, his body relaxed, and that smile on his face. "Look at the both of you. Have you been rolling in mud? Honestly, between you two and your uncle, you're going to drive me into an early grave. Rosie, get a broom and sweep this mess off the veranda, will you? And you'd both better clean up before you come and have your lunch." As I walked through the corridor to the kitchen, my ears picked out Matthew's cackle in the background, and I pictured him going over to greet his aunt with a kiss. I picked up the broom and got ready to return to the veranda. But as I marched out to the kitchen, there he was, his dirty feet trudging in and stopping mine completely. For a moment, frozen awkwardly in time, we simply stared at each other in silence. I shuffled my feet and looked down. "We should find time..." He cleared his throat and scratched the edge of his right eyebrow. We should talk." I remained quiet. "I don't mean now. I mean, it doesn't have to be today even, but I think we should talk." I pursed my lips. "I mean, if you want to. I'm not forcing you or anything like that." The tips of his ears now matched the flush flooding his cheeks. "I heard what Tawana said to you yesterday," I blurted. He stared at me, blinking quickly. And he was right. I shouldn't have said all those terrible things. He moved closer so that I could smell the leafy aroma of tea leaves, musked, mixed with the strong musky scent of sweat on his shirt. "This fighting between us must stop, mustn't it, Thandi?" He took my hand in his and lifted my chin with his other hand, his fingers brushing over the jagged scar along my jaw and forcing me to look at him. "Yes, the fighting must stop," I echoed, though I doubted whether just saying these words could erase the distance between us. He smiled, and before I knew it, he'd pulled me into his chest and wrapped his arms around me. His right hand slid to the small of my back. I could not stop focusing on the thinness of his lips as his face slowly pulled in towards mine. "Matthew, you should come see how..." Philip, laughing, entered the kitchen. I watched his forehead crease like clothes that have been left unironed. I took a step back, and Matthew slowly let go of me. "Cousin?" he said uneasily, moving towards the kitchen door. But Philip quietly turned around and exited the room, leaving us both standing just where we had been when we first began wading through the ocean between us.